Greetings, hello. Uh, I'm going to continue reading from The Hidden Life of Trees. I'm really keen to complete this task, and yeah, we're at chapter 33, and the title is Healthy Forest Air. Let's go. Forest air is the epitome of healthy air. People who want to take a deep breath of fresh air or engage in physical activity in a particularly agreeable atmosphere step out into the forest. There's every reason to do so. The air is truly the air truly is considerably cleaner under the trees because the trees act as huge air filters. Their leaves and needles hang in a steady breeze, catching large and small particles as they float by. Per year and square mile, this can amount to 20,000 tons of material. Trees trap so much because their canopy presents such a large surface area. In comparison with a meadow of a similar size, the surface area of a forest is 100 times larger, mostly because of the size difference between trees and grass. The filtered particles contain not only pollutants such as soot, but also pollen and dust blown up from the ground. It is the filtered particles from human activity, however, that are particularly harmful. Acids, toxic hydrocarbons, and nitrogen compounds accumulate in the trees like fat in the filter of an exhaust fan above the kitchen stove. But not only do trees filter materials out of the air, they also pump substances into it. They exchange scent males and, of course, pump out photosides, both of which I have already mentioned. Forests differ a great deal from one another depending on the species of trees they contain. Coniferous forests noticeably reduce the number of germs in the air, which feels particularly good to people who suffer from allergies. However, reforestation programs introduce spruce and pines to areas where they are not native, and the newcomers experience substantial problems in their new habitats. Usually, they are brought to low elevations that are too warm and dry for conifers to thrive. As a result, the air is dustier, as you can clearly see with the dust motes are backlit by sun streaming down on a summer's day. Oh, I misread there. As a result, the air is dustier, as you can clearly see when the dust motes are backlit by sun streaming down on a summer's day. And because the spruce and pines are constantly in danger of dying of thirst, they are easy prey for bark beetles, which come along to make a meal of them. At this point, frantic scent males begin to swirl around in the canopy. The trees are screaming for help and activating their arsenal of chemical defenses. You absorb all of this with every breath of forest air you take into your lungs. Is it possible that you could unconsciously register the tree's state of alarm? Consider this. Threatened forests are inherently unstable, and therefore they are not appropriate places for human beings to live. And because our Stone Age ancestors were always on the lookout for ideal places to set up camp, it would make sense if we could intuitively pick up on the state of our surroundings. There is a scientific observation that speaks to this. The blood pressure of forest visitors rises when they are under conifers, whereas it calms down and falls in stands of oaks. Why don't you take the test for yourself and see what type of forest you feel most comfortable? Sure. Whether we can somehow listen in on tree talk is a subject that was recently addressed in the specialized literature. Korean scientists have been tracking older women as they walk through forests and urban areas. The result? When the women were walking in the forest, their blood pressure, their lung capacity, and the elasticity of their arteries improved, whereas an excursion into town showed none of these changes. It's possible that phytoncides have a beneficial effect on our immune system as well as the tree's health because they kill germs. Personally, however, I think the swirling cocktail of tree talk is the reason we enjoy being out in the forest so much. At least when we are out in undisturbed forests, walkers who visit one of the ancient deciduous preserves in the forests I manage always report that their heart feels lighter and they feel right at home. If they walk instead through coniferous forests, which in Central Europe are mostly planted and are therefore more fragile, artificial places, they don't experience such feelings. Possibly it's because in ancient beech forests, fewer alarm calls go out. And therefore, most messages exchanged between trees are contented ones, and these messages reach our brain cells as well, via our noses. I'm convinced that we intuitively register the forest's health. Why don't you give it a try? I'm considering it. Contrary to popular opinion, the air in a forest is not always particularly rich in oxygen. The essential gas released when water and carbon dioxide are broken down during photosynthesis. Every day in summer, trees release about 29 tons of oxygen into the air per square mile of a forest. A person breathes in nearly 2 pounds of oxygen a day, so that's the daily requirement for about 10,000 people. Wow. Every walk in the forest is like taking a shower in oxygen, but only during the day. Trees manufacture large amounts of carbohydrates not only to lay them down as wood, but also to satisfy their hunger. Trees use carbohydrates as fuel, just as we do. And when they do, they convert sugar into energy and carbon dioxide. During the day, this doesn't affect the air much because after all the additions and subtractions, there is still that surplus oxygen I just mentioned. At night, however, the trees don't photosynthesize, and so they don't break down carbon dioxide. Quite the opposite, in fact. In the darkness, it's all about using carbohydrates, burning sugar in the cells, power generating stations, and releasing carbon dioxide. But don't worry, you won't suffocate if you take a nighttime ramble. A steady movement of air through the forest ensures that all the gases are well mixed at all times, and so the drop in oxygen near the ground is not particularly noticeable. How does a tree breathe, anyway? You can see a part of its own lungs. These are the needles or leaves. They have narrow stilts on their undersides that look a bit like tiny mouths. The tree uses these openings to exhale oxygen and breathe in the carbon dioxide. At night, when the tree is not photosynthesizing, it does the reverse. It's a long way from the leaves down the trunk to the roots, and that's why tree roots can breathe as well. If they didn't, deciduous trees would die in winter when they discard their above-ground lungs. But the trees keep ticking over and their roots even grow a little, so energy must be produced with the help of the tree's reserves, and for this, the trees need oxygen. And that is why it is so awful for a tree if the soil around its trunk has been so compacted that the small air pockets in the soil have been crushed. The tree's roots suffocate, or at least have difficulty breathing, with the result that the tree gets sick. But let's get back to breathing at night. It's not only the trees that are exhaling large amounts of carbon dioxide in the dark. In leaves, in deadwood, and in other other rotting plant material. Microscopic creatures, fungi and bacteria are busy in a round-the-clock feeding frenzy, digesting everything edible and then excreting it as humus. In winter, this situation gets even tougher. This, of course, is when the trees are hibernating, and even during the day, the oxygen levels are not being topped up, while the soil organisms continue merrily working away underground. They generate so much heat that even in a hard frost, the ground doesn't freeze more than 2 inches. Does that mean that a forest in winter is dangerous? What saves us is the global circulation of air, which constantly blows fresh marine air over the continent. A multitude of algae live in salt water. Thanks to them, large amounts of oxygen bubble up out of the ocean year-round. Algal activity in the ocean balances the oxygen deficit in the Central European forests in the winter so well. Oh, my computer is flashing. Just, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. So well that we can breathe deeply, even when we are standing under beaches and spruce covered in snow. On the subject of sleep, have you ever considered whether this is something trees even need? What would happen if we wanted to help them, and so we provided them with light at night as well as during the day so that they could manufacture more sugar? According to current research, that would be a bad idea. It seems trees need their rest just as much as we do, and sleep deprivation is as detrimental to trees as it is to us. In 1981, the German journal Gartenamt reported that 4% of oak deaths in one American city happened because the trees were subjected to light every night. And what about the long period of hibernation? This has already been tested unwittingly by some forest fans. I wrote about this in chapter 22, Hibernation. They brought young oaks and beeches into their houses where they kept them in pots on windowsills. In cozy living rooms, there is no such thing as winter as far as the temperature is concerned, which means most of the young trees couldn't take a breather and just continue to grow. But at some point, lack of sleep exerted its revenge, and the plants which had seemed so full of life died. Now you could argue that some winters aren't really very wintry, and at least at lower elevations there are hardly any frosty days. Despite this, deciduous trees still lose their leaves and don't grow them again until spring, because as I've already mentioned, they also measure day length. But isn't that also the case for the little trees on the windowsill? It might be the case if the heating were turned off and the winter evenings were spent in the dark, but hardly any of us are willing to give up the comfortable temperatures, around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and warm white electric light that conjure up artificial summers inside our houses. And no Central European forestry can endure eternal summer. That's it, nice and short. And the next that is coming up probably tomorrow is chapter 34, and that is, why is the forest green? Okay, so cool. I hope that you do get some rest, and that rest is peaceful, and that you have good dreams, and that you wake up feeling grateful and thankful and rejuvenized. Okay, bye.